To access the closed captioning, click on the CC at the bottom of your page, and that will get you access to CC Live transcript on the Zoom control panel. If you experience technological difficulties, please go to the technological support guides area above the schedule on the Symposium page. Please keep your video feature off and stay muted to eliminate any potential distractions during the presentation. We would love for you to tweet out or share out in social media all that you are learning from our symposium in this session. The hashtag for the symposium is #PatentLit2002. And we would now like to introduce to you Michael Hunter.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for attending, especially late in the day like this. I'm so excited to be here. So let's talk about oral reading practice. Before we start, we're going to take questions in the chat at appropriate stops. So you can type your questions in, and that may save us some time at the end. But if you have questions that don't get answered during the session, my email address is here, michael@readsters.com, and we'll make sure that gets in the chat as well so you can see that. And I'm happy to answer questions whenever you're able to email me. So let's get started. First off, if you have the handouts, have access to the handouts, there are going to be many handouts in many slides that are not in your handouts, and they will always have a red title like this. That lets you know that they're not supposed to be in your handout. They're probably answer slides or housekeeping slides. So if you look up and see a red title, don't fret, it's not supposed to be in your handout. We have 3 objectives for this session. The first is a way to think about looking at the components of fluency, and then concrete suggestions for oral reading practice for those who need to improve rate, accuracy, or both. And then finally, we're going to share some tracking charts for measuring fluency that include more than simply recording rate. So first question is, what is fluency? And I think you all have a pretty good grip on what fluency is, but I do want to just remind us that fluency is more than rate. Fluency is a combination of accuracy first, then rate, which is only reasonable rate. It's not fast as possible. And then finally, expression or prosody plays a role in fluency as well. So we can't just think about words correct per minute when we think about fluency. Fluency measures do have a benchmark, and they're usually extracted from either the Hasbrouck-Tyndall or other norms. And that's a target range to be aware of, but we're going to talk about whether we need to be right at that target or not. And it isn't the only information we want. We also want to know about accuracy because, and we'll talk about that in a moment, why we are concerned with that. So it's also important to recognize that even though oral reading fluency is a nice proxy for comprehension for a quick screening measure, so if you use DIBELS or AIMS-Webs or those kind of screening measures, it's a great tool, but it does not tell us what is causing disfluency if there is in fact disfluency. If your students are not meeting the benchmark or not reading accurately, then you're going to need to do some diagnostic work to figure out how to solve the problem, because just trying to improve their rate, their words correct per minute, is not going to necessarily solve the issue. Fluency results when all of those many components that go into making a proficient reader are working well, each individually working accurately and automatically, and then also working with each other accurately and automatically. So fluency is the result of all of these other important and critical skills that go into reading, working well together and working well individually. And so if we see disfluency, we may need to, we need to do some diagnostic assessment, and it might be on either the decoding side or the language side or both to figure out what's causing the disfluency. So fluency practice is not going to fix missing foundational skills. Fluency is necessary for comprehension, but it isn't sufficient to produce comprehension. there are other factors that go into place. And those need to be attended to make sure that even if a student's reading fluency, that they are still getting comprehension. So it's just really important to remember that it may not be just a student is showing disfluent on a screener, put them in fluency practice. That's most likely not going to solve the problem by itself. That doesn't mean we don't do oral reading practice. And you'll notice that I'm calling it oral reading practice and not fluency practice. It's a word change I'm trying to encourage people to get, because you're going to see that we're not going to just practice rate. We're going to practice more than rate, and that it's not just fluency that we're going after. So remember that frequently students who are disfluent have decoding weaknesses, and they are going to need separate instruction, phonics instruction, and possibly even some phonemic awareness instruction to improve their automatic decoding, as well as oral reading practice to practice their accuracy, and then if necessary, their rate. So who needs phonics instruction in addition to oral reading practice? Well, here's some guidelines. First of all, thinking about students who have difficulty with accurate reading of 1 to 3 syllable words, and the common spelling patterns that we would think about are here listed. I'm not going to read all those out to you, but here's a guide. Short vowels, R-controlled vowels, silent E, vowel teams, open syllables, and then consonant LE syllables. Students will need explicit instruction in these phonics patterns if they're not able to easily and accurately read words with those patterns. And that's not going to get fixed in fluency practice or oral reading practice. So in grades 1 and 2, we like to typically assess phonics skills as just part of the normal assessment routine. So if you're doing a 3 times a year oral reading fluency screener, like Dibbles or MSWebs or one of the others, if you see someone not meeting the benchmark or not reading accurately enough, we automatically would then go right to an informal decoding assessment to see if decoding is part of the problem or not. If it's not part of the problem, then the problem has to be on the language comprehension side. And then we have to tease out what's going on there. But we know that quite often, most often, there is a decoding issue, and we want to figure that out and then figure out how we're going to go about fixing that. In grades 3+, we make sure that we give any student who is reading less than 96% accurate or less than 90% of whatever the benchmark for the measure you're using is, we will definitely do a decoding diagnostic for those students and rule decoding in or out. Now, our oral reading practice, our mantra is accuracy before rate. And here's why. We're going to consider 2 second graders here in middle of the year, January. They took an oral reading measure, and the benchmark for that particular measure was they were expected to read at 68 or higher words correct per minute. And if we look at the 2 students, we have Billy. He read 65 words, but he had 2 errors. So his words correct per minute was 63. That is below the expected the minimum benchmark. Sally, on the other hand, attempted 81 words, had 9 errors, and she then had a score of 72 words correct per minute. So if we just look at the words correct per minute, who is looking good? Sally exceeds the benchmark, so she would seem to be doing fine, but Billy is below the benchmark, so we would be concerned about him. However, if we add to the words correct per minute an accuracy calculation, we suddenly see that Billy is reading 97% accurately, even though he's a tad slow. Whereas Sally, who is reading above the benchmark, is reading with an 89% accuracy, which is not good. 89%, even though that seems like a high number, is well below our recommended 97 or 98% accuracy that you need for good comprehension. If you're missing that many of the words, your comprehension is going to be damaged no matter how quickly you read. So we must measure accuracy in addition to the rate, which is what the words correct per minute reflects. So we're going to, in our practice, you're going to see that we are going to separate out our practice. We're going to separate accuracy from rate and practice accuracy first, and then worry about rate once a student is reading accurately. Remember that our goal, if we're even worrying about fluency, is comprehension. The goal of reading, of course, is comprehension. So we do know that low accuracy will more than likely impede comprehension. If you're not accurately reading the words, you're not getting the author's intent, and therefore you're going to lose some comprehension. And so accuracy will definitely get in the way of comprehension. However, sometimes being a little bit slow below the benchmark will not necessarily produce poor comprehension if you're reading accurately. So a student like Billy, who's a little bit slow but reading accurately, actually has a better chance of comprehension, better comprehension than Sally, who's reading too fast and is reading sloppily. So the only issue gets to be is if a student's reading too slowly, it may affect their ability to complete tasks in the time allotted to complete tasks, and they may require an accommodation for time, but they'll still be able to complete the task successfully and have good comprehension. So when you have to weigh up where you're going to put your limited intervention resources, a student who's, within 10% of the benchmark, but is reading 97 or higher accuracy is not a student you may choose to, with that student to say they'll be okay. I have students who have much greater deficits that I need to spend my intervention time on when you have to make those decisions. So what is our recommended accuracy when we're listening to students read aloud for instruction or for, for instruction? Let's talk about instruction, not assessment. So when we are listening to students read decodable text, our expectation is that they can read it 100% accurately, because if the decodable text is at the appropriate level for their phonics instruction, there's no reason they can't read 100% accurately. When students are practicing for accuracy with any text and we're listening to them read and they're not being timed, we again are expecting 100% accuracy, because if they have all the time and they have the appropriate decoding skills, they should be able to be accurate. Now, when we shift to listening to students reading for rate and we're worrying about when we're worrying about improving their rate, we still want at least 98% accuracy. We do allow them to read, make an occasional error because they are reading and they're working on the reading for rate. They're trying to read a little bit faster. So those are our recommended accuracy goals for instruction. When they're reading on their own to themselves, who knows what their accuracy rate is. But for instruction, most of the time we're looking for 100% accuracy. And if we hold students accountable for that, they will fall into that 98% or higher rate all the time. Just a reminder of how to calculate accuracy. It's simple. You take the total words read correct and you divide it by the total words read. So if a student in 1 minute read 100 words, but they only had 98 words correct, you divide the 98 by 100 and you get a 94% accuracy. So it's simple calculation. If you have the information to calculate their words correct per minute, which is total words read and total words correct, then it's real easy to calculate the accuracy rate as well. I told you that I use the term oral reading practice instead of fluency practice, and we're trying to change our mindset by doing that. We also can change our mindset by, instead of saying fluency practice, we can be more specific and say, are we practicing for accuracy? So we're doing accuracy practice, or are we working on our rate and doing rate practice? And you're going to see that we split those two practices. So with our new approach, who needs accuracy practice? Well, any student who, when assessed on an oral reading fluency measure, reads with less than 97% accuracy, regardless of their rate, should practice for accuracy. Some schools choose to go even higher and catch those kids that are at 97% and just bring them up to make sure they're in that 98, 99, 100% range if they have the resources to do that. Who practices for rate? For rate, any student who is reading accurately, but not fast enough, and we want to get them faster. And any students who have had reading accuracy practice and have achieved that 98 or 97% accuracy and are still reading slowly. So you're going to see that we will, if we have students who are practicing for accuracy, they will practice for accuracy. Once they've achieved accuracy and met the goals for that, then we look at their rate and determine, are they reading fast enough, or do we need to speed them up? And then if we do, then we will shift to rate practice at that point. I will tell you that in all the work we've done with this, with many, many, many schools, most of the time, once students are reading accurately, their rate is fine too. And we don't really need to spend time trying to get them to read faster. So that's good news. But some students still may need some help with achieving rate. So what is our new approach? Before we dive into that, I'd just like to ask real quickly, are there any questions that anybody has? You can type them into the chat if you want, or you can just unmute and holler out before we move to the next section. I do see one in the chat that says, what diagnostics tools do we use for students in second or lower? I can answer that question. Are you asking about diagnostic? Okay, diagnostic tools. We use, right now, we use the original Really Great Reading decoding surveys. I understand they have just put out a new one. I don't know anything about it, so I can't talk to that one. Linda, my business partner, I wrote the original version of the Really Great Reading, and Form A of that is free. So if you can't get access to it, you can email me for it, and I can send you that. We no longer have anything to do with Really Great Reading, and we don't own the published version of that assessment, but it's the one we still use. And we, on our website, have a pre-reading skills, free pre-reading skills diagnostic if you need to go and look at pre-reading skills, which you might with students in 1 and 2 who are, not performing at expected levels. Another question, should students with IEP goals have goals that focus on just accuracy first and then rate once accuracy is mastered? I would say absolutely. So accuracy first. If they meet the accuracy goal, then we look at, do they also still need a rate goal? Because again, as I said, if they, what we find is that most often when students have achieved the accuracy rate, their accuracy goal, their rate goal is okay. It's acceptable. But some students will need, they will need some help getting faster. Okay, there's a question about text, and I'm going to hold that one. If I haven't answered it, remind us. But I want you to see our practice, and you'll get some answers about what we're using for materials and stuff to do this practice. And I'd rather address that later.
Michael, could you just
Yes.
repeat that decoding diagnostic that you had mentioned? And if you
Sure.
also offer a language comprehension diagnostic as well.
We don't do a lot with a comprehension diagnostic, but the CFOL, CFOL, if you Google that, I believe that's by Acadians. I've heard good things about it, and it might be useful. Again, for the decoding diagnostic, the one we still currently use is the original Really Great Reading diagnostic decoding surveys. And I don't know if that one is still available on their website. I haven't been to check. I just heard that they've come out with a new version, and because I don't know the new version, I can't talk about it.
And Michael, I had a question that said, do you have an assessment that can help with understanding a student's comprehension?
Yes, that would be the CFAL that I just mentioned from Acadience, and
Okay.
that will look into the language side of the rope or the simple view, and look at things like vocabulary and syntax and that sort of thing. I haven't had an opportunity to use it since I've learned about it, but it comes highly recommended by some people I respect. So I think it's definitely worth looking at to see if it might be helpful for you.
One other quick question: if a
yeah.
student has speech errors, how do you handle that with counting that as an error or not an error?
If you know about speech errors and you know that the student is accurately reading the word, but has a speech issue that's preventing them from pronouncing it in the expected way, I would count that not as an error, because what we're trying to see is, are you accurately reading the word? However, that doesn't include leaving off endings, because your dialect is such that you leave off endings. Because when you're reading aloud to a teacher, you should be reading precisely, and it shouldn't sound like the way you talk to your friends on the playground. And that's an expectation we have to set for the students. And the reason is that we need to hear, are they actually reading a plural ending or not reading a plural ending? And we can't tell if they don't say it. So we have to count it as an error if they don't do it. And they'll have to change their habit a little bit. But this whole accuracy practice is, in fact, changing habit. And so that's a good habit to also change. Any other quick questions before we?
Just quickly, if we're using decodable text mostly in small groups, how do we prepare students to take an oral reading fluency assessment?
Yeah, if they're still reading decodable text in small group, that means that their decoding skills aren't as secure as the oral reading fluency measure is looking for from second grade on. And so you know that they may have some difficulty, and they have to do the best that they can, and that you'll get the information that they still need work on improving their accuracy. That's a complicated, and I'd be happy to, if that person wants to email me, we can connect and talk a little more in depth. That's a hard one to answer quickly, as you can imagine. Thank you. Okay, so let's move into practicing so we have time to see how this works. If you have access to the handouts, it would be great if you have them printed out, but if you have them where you can pull them up on your screen and see them alongside what we're doing, that will also probably work for you. But we have in the first page, we had two sets of handouts in the what we posted, and one was the slides that you're seeing, and then the other was a practice packet, working practice packet. In the working practice packet, the first page looks like this, and it has a passage that we've taken from another source, and we've just adapted the layout to suit what we're going to do. And there's a code that we use, so let's talk about what we see here. First, this is a set 2 passage, which tells us this is a very, very sophisticated code. Set 2 means that it's grade 2. But we don't want our students who are in grades above grade 2 who have to start their practice working at grade 1 or grade 2 level materials to be conscious that they're working in grade 1 materials. We're just going to simply tell them, you're going to start this practice working with easy materials so that you can get used to the procedures that we're going to be working with, and that it will be, you'll be able to meet your goal easily. And then as you meet your goal, we'll step you up to more difficult materials. So if you finish and meet your goal in set 2, we'll move to set 3, and the text will be a little more challenging, but you'll be ready to work on it. We just don't need to tell them what grade level it is, because that's not, they don't need to worry about what grade level they're in this practice. The next code is that this one is just labeled passage 4 because you'll need multiple passages. So this is the 4th passage in our set 2 that we're working with. And then we divide, and this is how we adapt other texts that we're going to use for practice, because we haven't had time and personnel to write our own passages yet. We hope to someday, but we can adapt others, other passages that we can get our hands on. And what we did is we divided basically on the paragraphs, and then we count the number of words in the paragraph and label it as section A, and this has 47 words. You can see that section B has 32 words, section C 53. Now they're going to vary a little bit. That really won't matter. They're all going to come out relatively the same, and they will get longer as we move up in grade level. It's just the way text passages tend to be written. So as the students are moving up through grade levels, they're going to be reading longer sections as well as more complex text, and that's good. So this is how we set it up. And here's what happens. When the students are reading, and this is we're going to be talking about small group, maybe 4 or maybe 5 max students at a time working together. Each student is going to have a turn to read. And when it's a student's turn to read, they will each read a different section of a passage. If I had 5 students and there are only 4 sections in this passage, I would have another passage ready to go with, and that 5th student to read would read section A in passage 5. Okay, so each student has a section that they're going to read aloud. Every student in the group is going to have a copy of the same passages, so that when one student is reading aloud, so that I can track what they're doing, the other students are held accountable for following along and checking how that student is doing. So I need to see my non-readers following along. And when they finish, I'm going to ask the non-readers, the ones that we're tracking, I call them checkers, and I say, checkers. And the checkers have one job. They either give me a thumbs up, which means they heard all the words read accurately, or they give me a helping hand that says that they think they heard an error that the student might need help with. Now, it does not matter if the checkers are accurate or not, because you're going to be tracking as the teacher and you'll know. And if they hold up helping hands, but you heard it all accurately, all you simply say is, thank you, checkers. I heard 100% accuracy. Next student will have a turn to read. If they heard 100% accuracy, but you heard an error, you'll say, thank you, checkers. I heard, and then you're going to tell the student, if there were 47 words and you heard 2 errors, you're going to say, I heard 45 words correct, instead of saying I heard 2 errors. You're going to tell the student how many words they got correct. And that's what we call positive error correction. So as soon as the checkers have shown me whatever their answer is, I'm going to do and say, I heard all correct, or I heard 45, however many words correct. So you give yourself a second to count however many errors you counted, so that you can give the student how many words they got correct. The reason for having the other students track along is 2 things. One, they are being busy and engaged while we're listening to one student read. And the truth is, if they're listening to one student read a passage that they haven't read yet, and that they're not going to read aloud, they are getting practice reading the reading text, and they also get the content that's in the text. So it's not wasted time for them. But you do have to hold them accountable to make sure that they are tracking, or as you probably know your students, some of them will check out. And so ways to do that are, if you see students not tracking, you can stop the reader and say, I am so sorry, reader one, but some of our checkers are not doing their job and following along. So I'm going to have to ask you to start again. And you do that a few times and people will get the message, and peer pressure will start to kick in, and they'll like, I want to finish this. I don't want to have to keep stopping in the middle. I want my chance to get it accurately. And they'll be held, everybody will do what they're supposed to do. Another way that I've done it sometimes is if I see people not tracking, I will just tell my reader, I'll say, everybody freeze. And I want to see what word everybody's pointing to or tracking with their pencil. And if people aren't in the right place, then I don't have to say anything. I just can see that they have not been tracking accurately. And then I tell my reader, I'm sorry, but we have to start again. So that's how we keep everybody actively working while we're listening to individuals read in a small group. If a student does not get 100% accuracy the first time they read a section, well, I'll show you tracking in just a moment. We'll track it on their chart. We go to the next student and they'll read their section and we track what they do. We keep going through so that each student in the group has a turn to read their section. And remember, nobody reads the same section. Each student is going to read their own section, because the first time they read, we want them to have a cold read, a read that they haven't heard anybody else read aloud. So we're listening for what they can do the first time they read a section. If they do not get 100% accuracy the first time, when it is their turn again, they will reread the same section. So if student one read section A but did not get 100% accuracy, when it's student one's turn to read again, whether it's in today's session or tomorrow's session, they will reread that same section, and they will continue to reread that section when it's their turn until they get their 100% accuracy. Once a student has gotten 100% accuracy on a section, they will never read it again, and nobody else will read it. They will move on to another passage in the same set level, but another passage to try to get 100% accuracy on their first turn. That's the goal, to read the section 100% accurately on the first turn. And this is something different than most accuracy or most fluency programs. It's one of the big differences. You may be wondering, how do we know when a student can move up to a higher grade level? And remember, I don't know if I've made it clear, but we are going to start a student at a lower grade level than their current grade level if they're above grade 1, so that they start with easier material than what they're expected to be able to read in, say, taking an oral reading fluency measure. A student can move up a level once they've demonstrated to us that they have mastered reading at the current level that they're in, that lower level, 100% accurately. And how they demonstrate mastery to us is they give us 3 cold reads. So the first time they read a section that they've never read before aloud to us and haven't read silently, they give us 100% accuracy. They do that 3 sections in a row. Doesn't have to be the same day, and that's where the tracking chart will help. But it is back to back in turns for them. So if they get 100% accuracy on 2 sections, and then they have a bad day and they don't get 100% accuracy on the next section that they're reading, we start over again on that 3 in a row. It has to be 3 back to back. So this is habit change that we're working on, and we expect students to occasionally slip and be almost there but not quite there. Great. we'll just keep trying until we achieve it. When are we through with the accuracy practice? When the student has demonstrated that same mastery, 3 cold reads in a row, so back-to-back turns, 3 first time, 100% accuracy in their grade level material. So if you have a 4th grader and they've worked their way up to 4th grade material and they get their 3 cold reads back to back, then they're through with accuracy, and that's the time to check and make sure that their fluency is good. If it's not, then you will shift to fluency practice, so rate practice rather, but they still have to keep at least 98% accuracy. So we don't drop accuracy altogether, we just slip back a little bit and give them a little leeway, because now they're focusing on keeping accuracy, but also trying to read faster. So what do we want our students to know about this whole accuracy practice? First thing that we want them to know is their goal is to read the first time they read something 100% accuracy. And they will always continue to read the same section until they have gotten 100% accuracy. This sets the habit and expectation for 100% accuracy in reading. And we don't move on until you've demonstrated that, because we want you to read everything 100% accurately. So there are 2 things that a student can do that will not count as errors. One is they can self-correct. So they misread a word, but immediately correct themselves. That is called a self-correction. And they are allowed to have 2 of those, but no more than 2 in a section. The other thing that will count as a self-correction is a repetition. So if a student rereads a word, and I call these the running start kids that start at the beginning of a sentence and they read a little bit of a sentence. So if the student has more than 2, so they repeat 1 or more words that they've read accurately before they continue with the sentence. And I'm going to show you how we mark that. We underline it and call it a repeat, and that would count as 1 self-correction. That will count as 1 of the 2 self-corrections max that they can have. So they could have 1 repeat and 1 self-correction. They could have 2 self-corrections or 2 repeats. Any more than that will still result in a rereading of that section when it's their next turn. There is no timing while we're doing this. Students can take as long as they need to get their accuracy. And many of our students, most of the students I would say that I work with, have to slow down first. That's the first thing they need to do to read accurately. A lot of their mistakes are partially decoding words and guessing rather than accurately reading the word before they say it. And that's the major habit that we're trying to change. As opposed to assessment, where you have an oral reading fluency assessment measure, you would have a 3-second rule, because you are timing the students and you want to make sure that they don't get stuck on 1 word and get a completely abysmal score just because 1 word held them up. In this accuracy practice, there's no timing, so there's no need for a 3-second rule. So you can wait as long as 30 seconds or more if a student is actively trying to figure out the word. And you can pretty much tell as a teacher when they are still trying to figure it out, or when they're just kind of completely lost, and then help them. We encourage the students to ask for help if they need help, but we'd prefer them to try to work it out first, and they learn that we'll give them time. And once they've had time and they still feel like, I just can't get this word, then they can say, I'd like help, please. And that will still count as an error, but they can continue to work on their accuracy. So accuracy chart. In the handout packet, there are going to be two charts in there for you. One is for rate and one is for accuracy. The accuracy chart is on page 3 of the handout, and it looks like this. Each student that's in the practice will have their own accuracy chart, and that will be where they track every time they have a turn, you and they will track their turn. I saw a question flash up, and I think it's one I can answer quickly. What do you do if another student yells out the answer during in lower grades like first grade, since they aren't at the passage level yet? Well, we established early on with our students that when it is one student's turn to read, the checkers or the trackers are not allowed to say anything. Their job, they will get to let everybody know that they heard a mistake by doing a helping hand when we say checkers. And if they're blurting out the answers, that's something we have to control. We find that once they establish the checkers routine and that they know their job is to follow along, they love following along and trying to catch the other mistake. The issue is that they're not allowed to tell the other student what the mistake is. And they can understand pretty quickly that they don't want other students fixing their mistake for them when it's their turn. They'd much rather try to work it out with the teacher. And we just remind them that, you know, everybody wants their turn to fix their own mistakes. Okay. Question, are passages considered decodable for each grade level? The passages we're talking about using here for this oral reading fluency, or excuse me, oral reading practice for accuracy and for rate are not decodable passages. These are leveled passages. So most any fluency program that has passages will have leveled passages for each grade. And that's the type of passage that we would use for this practice. Decodable practice is a different practice for us. It's very similar in that we are holding students accountable for 100% accuracy, but in fact, they're not allowed even any self-corrections. If they make a self-correction, they still are going to reread for accuracy, and the same for repeats, because in decodable, they should be able to do it, and that's the expectation. The other difference in decodable is that we give them, each student will have up to 3 turns to read their section accurately before another student gets a turn to read their section, because the sections are going to be shorter in decodable, and the practice is a focus. It's still accuracy, but it's a little bit different. If you go to our website, readsters.com, www.readsters.com, in the resources area, we have a little practice packet, instructions for using decodable text, practicing accuracy with decodable text, that has directions for how we do that practice. It's very similar to this, but the text is different because it's decodable text at the appropriate level. And it is actually part of our phonics practice. Before we move to a new concept in phonics instruction, we always make sure students get individual turns reading connected, decodable text that has that concept that they're practicing and learning, so that they get practicing with accuracy in connected, decodable text. So it's a different practice than this. This practice is for typically for students who have moved beyond the basic foundational skills of beginning decoding and are still being inaccurate in their leveled text reading, or grade level, if you will, text reading, and need to fix their accuracy practice. But it can be teamed up alongside with students who are getting phonics instruction in advanced phonics concepts and need to transfer that practice to grade level text. But first graders for us are not expected to. We expect them mostly until the end, towards the end of the year, to still be working in decodable text, because that's where they're learning and that's where their practice is. Okay, there's a question about where to find the passages. We'll address that towards the end. I do have a slide on it in here. Okay, so back to the accuracy chart. The chart looks like this. So before the student reads, first their name will go up where it says name. And then for the day that they're reading the session, the date goes in, the set number from which is the level of the passage. So if they're reading second grade level, it'll be set 2, the actual passage number, and then the section that is going to be their section to read, A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. And then the total number of words that are in their section. And I personally like to have, I guide the students in filling out this for themselves if they're in grade 2 and above, so that they get some ownership of it. If I'm filling out part of it for them, I do like to have them tell me how many words their section has so that they know what their target goal is, so that when they get them right, I can tell them, wow, you got 46 right. And then this next section is, once they've read, is where we're going to record how many words they read correctly, Yahoo. And then if they had any self-corrections, which remember also includes repeats. And that's where we'll know, even if they got 47 out of 47 words read correctly, but had 3 or more self-corrections or repeats, then they're still going to reread that same section when it's their next turn. Once we've done that, we calculate, and that you'll need a calculator, or I just use my cell phone, which has a calculator on it, to figure out their accuracy. We tell them what their accuracy rate is. It's recorded here. And then the student will, and I'll show you in a moment what it looks like, they fill in the bar chart below to show what their accuracy rate was. So as we're listening to a student read, we need to record. We will have a copy of the same passage. We will record or track what they do along with the students. We don't worry about teaching the other students how to do this marking. The other students will just mark a dot or something under the word that they think they heard wrong, just so that they know that I think I heard an error, which just simply means silently holding up their helping hand when you ask checkers. So as in, if anybody's done oral reading fluency assessments, you know, typically you slash a word that is misread to show that it was misread. It's wonderful if you're practiced at this and have time to quickly write what the actual word that the student read was, so that you can start to see error patterns, like leaving off endings and things like that. If the student skips a word, you mark a slash, because a word not read is a word not read. That's an error. If a student adds a word in this practice, this will count as an error. So a student could read 47 words correctly out of 47, but if they added a word, they still have an error. And that would be calculated as one error in their calculation. If a student self-corrects, we mark SC over it to show that it was a self-correction, so that we know we're going to count it as a self-correction, but not an error. And if they repeat words, what we do is we underline the words repeated. If it's all repeated at one time, so even if it's a phrase, that will count as one repeat. I personally underline it and put an R over it, but underlining is enough. And then that will be counted as one self-correction on the tracking chart. It will not count as an error. Self-correction will not count as an error, so it won't be involved in the calculation. If a student skips an entire row, this only happens very rarely, but if it happens, you draw a line through the row, and then when you're counting, each skipped word counts as an error. So skipping a line is going to really ding you on your accuracy, and it should. So how does the practice work? Okay, if you have the handout, page 2 is passage 4, set 2, passage 4, And you can see we have Serena for section B and Jamar written in for section C, and they have already had their turns to read, and you can see what errors they made. We'll come back and look at Serena and Jamar in a moment, but first we're going to look at section A, and David will be our reader for section A, and we're going to practice that. So remember, a student reads one time, then the next student reads, and this will continue until your time for that session is up. And then in your next session, you'll just pick up with the next section that hasn't been read yet, with that's been assigned. Or if everybody's had one turn, then you just cycle through again, each person doing their turn. If they are reading a new section because they got 100% accuracy, when it's their turn, that's what they'll do. If they're reading a section they read before because they didn't get 100% accuracy, that's what they will read. They do not move to a new section until they've achieved their 100% accuracy with no more than 2 self-corrections, or which is a repeat or a self-correction. They do not move to a new section, and they move to a new set once they've gotten 3 in a row, 3 sections that they've read 100% accurately the first time. Okay, so let's try a practice here, just so you get a feel for what it's like. And the way we're going to do this is, for those of you that have been able to print out your handouts, you can track on your handout. If you want to just do it taking notes, you can try and track along. So I'm going to read section A. I'll be student David. My name's going to be David for this practice. So the first step in the practice is, I'm going to skip through this because I think we've covered all of that. David is going to read section A. So the first thing that you're going to do is write David next to the section, so we know that that's assigned to David. Then we'll go to David's tracking chart, and if this is the first time he's reading, you're going to need to put his name at the top, then the date in the first date column, then the set number, which remember is he's in set 2, so you would put 2. The passage is number 4. The section that he is reading is letter A, and then the words correct is 47. So now we're set up. David is ready to read, and when he's finished reading, we'll fill in words correct, self-correction, and then calculate his accuracy, and then he'll fill in the bottom part of the chart. So I'm going to go back, to here, so that if you have good eyes, I can't make this any bigger, but if you don't have the handout in front of you, you can try to track along as I read this and see if you can catch any errors that I make and practice the marking. So is everyone ready to do marking? Okay, so I'm going to read from a prepared script so that I make the correct mistakes, so that when I show you what I think the marking should look like, it should look correct. So I am David. I'm now going to read this passage for you, or this section of the passage. The moon looks like it changes shape over a mouth. After the moon is full, it gets small and smaller. In 15 days, we can't see the moon at all. Then it starts getting larger. At the end of 30 days, the moon appears full again. Okay. So see, anybody who was able to do the marking, if this is what you marked. So I did a repeat on like, so that will count as a self-correction. I read month as mouth, so that's an error. I read small for smaller, so that's an error. I omitted about, and the little O here on the slash tells me that I omitted it. And then because I read 13, I would have already recorded 13 as an error, but then when I corrected it, I would write SC to show that even though I heard an error there, I did hear the student self-correct it. So if we did that, and you guys can test yourselves and see how many words did David read correctly. So remember, he had 47 words total. And how many errors did he make? And the math is pretty simple there. So did you get 44? And then how many self-corrections did David get? And remember that a repeat is going to count as a self-correction. So I see 2 self-corrections. So when we go to David's chart now, we write in 44 words correct. We write in 2 self-corrections. And I've already calculated this for you. That's 94% accuracy. And David will use a colored marker to fill in up through 94 on the chart to show that he got 94% on this reading. And we are done with David. It's now Serena's turn, or whoever's next. In this case, Serena's already read, but it would be the next student's turn to read whatever the next section that's assigned to them is. Okay, let's stop quickly for some questions. I see a couple here. Do you vary sections A, B, C, D to ensure students follow along and pay attention? Yes, you can, well, what I could do is vary the turns, but you're going to start the first time you do this, the first person to read is going to do section A, the next student to read is going to do section B, next student is going to do section C, because it's just easy to assign that way. But you could mix up the turns after that so that students don't know. And remember, they're being held accountable for tracking. So if you set that practice from the beginning, and you see students who are not tracking or paying attention, you stop and say, I'm sorry, David, checkers aren't checking. You have to start again. And David's not going to want to have to keep doing that. You don't have to call out whoever wasn't doing it because they know they weren't doing it. And that will change it. And again, this is a chance for the other students to get some practice because they're reading all of this content and trying to catch errors. So they're doing their best reading, or should be. Somebody asked about, do you leave time to discuss the errors? Yes, I haven't quite covered that yet. We'll come to that in a second. Let me see if there's anything else that.
Michael, I have.
Somebody would like to see the error marking again. Is that, I think that's what that's saying. Okay, and Karen, did you have something?
Yes. How do you know what grade level to use?
We're going to cover that.
Okay.
Time permitting, it's in the handouts. If we don't get time to it, there's information in the handout.
And then you said that where the passages are coming from are coming as well.
Yes.
And then are the checkers looking at all of the parts when one of the student is reading? Do they tend to practice their section while they are supposed to be checking the student that is
They
reading?
will if you let them.
Okay. So cover up the others?
Yeah, you may need to do that. You know,
Okay.
and you let them know. The idea is we're asking, and the whole practice here is that your job is when you get to your section the first time, we want to hear what you do the first time, because that's what we're practicing. We're practicing reading correctly the first time. And if you're practicing, you're cheating yourself, because you're the only one that's going to suffer. You know, and yeah, it means you don't have to read it again, but you're also not going to change your habit. And this is all about you fixing your habit. It's not about me grading you, or this isn't going to go in a book and be your score on a test. This is, you know, helping you improve your reading. Okay. What if one student meets the accuracy, but the other students don't? Do you move the student to a new section in a different passage? If they're, yes, you do move. If whenever a student has gotten 100% accuracy on their section, the next time it's their turn to read, you find the next open section, whether it's in a new passage, or if there happens to be one open in the current passage, if there happen to be, 5 sections, you would just go to that one. But they don't go back and reread unless they didn't get 100% accuracy. They're always going to be trying, once they've got 100% accuracy, in a new section. And as long as you're in the same set level, it can be any passage from that set level. And then once they get their 3 cold reads in that set level, they can move up to another level. And you can have students in the same group who are reading from different set levels. If a student happens to be doing better than the other students and has moved up a set level, that's okay. The trackers can still track. It will be more challenging for them to track, but that's okay. And you want to keep that other student, moving along with them. And they are still getting exposure to practicing. You're not going to get above their grade level, presumably, unless you have mixed grade levels in a group. Okay, any other questions while I get back to where we are? Okay, what time is our session over, guys? Just quickly, I've lost track of time for a second here.
Yes,
Can
it's
somebody-
4:31 and our session is open over at 4:45.
Ooh, okay. So I'm going to push us along a little bit. We've been answering a lot of questions, which is good. I think you guys can figure out how to fill out the charts. And if you can't, you can test yourselves with the practice ones that are in there. But what I do want you to see is that Jamar had 2 self-corrections, but no errors. So he got 100%, even though he had the 2 self-corrections, because he only had 2. So in his next turn to read, there's no more sections in passage 4. He would go to passage 5 and read section A. And that would be his next practice. David needs to read again. Because he needs to read again and didn't get 100% accuracy, he's going to read section A again. He doesn't move on yet. If we only had 3 students, I'm sorry, and Jamar could have section D. If we had 4 sections, he'd have to go to next passage. Okay, the other thing I want to tell you quickly about the tracking chart is if you have your students use the same color, and each student can use a different color, but if for every section that they read, they use the same color to mark their bar chart in. And guys, you want to teach them to do this relatively quickly. They do this while you're setting up the chart for the next student. They can fill this in, but you want them to not spend all day doing it. They need to be ready to track when you start the next student. But if they use the same color, you can see when they change sections. And then you can see that with David here in this chart, it took him 4 times to get his 100% with only 0 self-corrections, no more than 2. On this one, he had 3 self-corrections. He was 100% correct, but had 3 self-corrections, so he had to read again. It took him 1 try. He had 98% on the next section, but he got 100% the second time. Then he got 100% on section B, on section D, and he's in a different passage now. He's in passage 6. And then he read passage 7, he read section E. He got 3 cold reads in a row, and you can see it by the colors. And then he moved up to section level 3 and was not accurate on his first time of section C in passage 1 of level 3. So yeah, thank you for putting that in the text. So you can see how the coloring can help. Let me just see. Okay, what I'm covering here. Okay, if David was in grade 4, once he gets 3 cold reads in a row, he in grade level 4, once he reads set 4 and gets 3 cold reads in a row, 100% accurately, he is through with this practice unless you feel like you want to push him on above grade level. I would check his rate first. If he doesn't need work on rate, he could continue accuracy practice, but you may have better things to do with that time, like working with some other students, and he should be fixed for accuracy and rate at that point. Okay, let's just quickly compare the practice, this practice, with what you may have seen other fluency programs, just so you can see what's different and hold that in mind. In this new approach, accuracy is the only measure for beginning practice. You're going to start with accuracy practice first until a student has demonstrated accuracy up to grade level, and then you look at rate and decide if you need to do that. The student's goal is to read 100% accurately the first time, and this is the practice first, to get in the habit of reading 100% accurately, and you start with easy material and demonstrate mastery at that level before you move up until you stair-step your way up to your grade level, and then you have demonstrated accuracy there, you're finished with accuracy. We find, again, often students have, once they've mastered the accuracy goal up to grade level, they have actually, their rate is just fine and we don't have to practice rate. If we find their rate is not, we will then go back and start rate practice, which is going to be different. And I will quickly try to cover that. Starting again with lower level materials and work the same way, 3 cold reads, achieving your rate goal with 98% accuracy or better up to grade level. The big difference here is that one of the other big differences is in typical fluency programs, students get to practice before they're assessed of whether they're reading accuracy. And we're doing the exact opposite. We want to see what you do on that cold read, because that's what we want everybody to do, is to be able to read accurately, not have to reread things. No one has time to reread something 3 times before they read it accurately. That just doesn't make sense. So why practice that? And then the other is that this is teacher guided practice. There needs to be a teacher or, somebody who's trained in this to do the tracking of the practice. One step that I really want to quickly cover that for some reason I have failed to cover, somebody asked a question about it, is before you leave the student who finished with errors. So in the case of David, before you leave him and start the next student's turn to read, you go over his errors with him. So you have him look at his passage, and that's Jamar. Let me get up to David. You would say, David, you repeated this, underline the word like in your passage, you repeated that word. Underline this word, and you point to it or show him where it is, and ask him to read the word. If he reads it incorrectly again, you help him read it correctly. But 9 times out of 10, when they're looking at a word in isolation, they can read it accurately. And so you just say, underline that word, read it. Oh, that's correct. Do not tell him what he read wrong. We don't want to reinforce the error. Go to the next word, say, underline this word. What's that word? If he reads it correctly, you say, that's correct. If he reads small again, you say, check your ending, help him read it correctly. This word, you say, underline this word. You skipped this word, you can tell him he skipped it. What's the word? And then the same for the self-correction, you can have him underline that and say, you self-corrected this one, just so. But what we're not trying to have the student stumped every time. We're trying to point out their errors so that they can correct their errors and that they can read it accurately the next time. And you will start to see patterns of errors that students make, like leaving off endings, etc., that will show up. And you can point those out to the student and say, I notice you're leaving off endings. If you concentrate on reading your endings, you will read accurately. If you're skipping words a lot, I will point out you're skipping words a lot. If you slow down and point to each word, you will read more accurately, and that's your goal. Okay, let's talk quickly about rate practice. Rate practice is only necessary for students who are already reading accurately, whether it's through the accuracy practice or they just are already, this is rare, but they're already in a habit of reading accurately, but are still reading slowly. That's who needs rate practice. The way the rate practice will work is you will have a different tracking chart, and you'll notice there's a place to fill in a rate goal for them. Once you've determined their rate goal, and there's information in the handouts, if I don't have time to help you with that, that we use an algorithm to figure that out. We set a rate goal for them, and then we do timed reading, just like you would do a fluency assessment, where a student reads for 1 minute from a passage. And you can use the same passages that have the lines drawn across them, but you're going to have to do some calculation. So we prefer to use a different setup that has the numbering all the way down, so we can put a bracket. If you've done any practice with giving oral reading fluency, you know how to do that. So the student reads for 1 minute. At 1 minute, you say stop. You keep track of the errors the same way you did before. In accuracy practice, the only difference is now you put a bracket after the last word they read at the time up, and have them, then you calculate their accuracy again, and you calculate their words correct per minute. And you still record self-corrections, because they can get words correct per minute, meet their goal, be accurate, but still have too many self-corrections. So 2 or 3 or more is still going to be a problem. And that would just mean you read again, try to keep your accuracy, have no self-corrections, and achieve your rate goal. Yikes, sorry guys, I've run to the time. Let me just quickly tell you, there is a algorithm page in the handouts where you can look at the students' accuracy rate from their oral reading fluency measure and their accuracy rate and their rate, and pick the lower grade level that corresponds with that. And that's where you start them for their accuracy practice. If in doubt, go to the lowest level and just work your way up. It won't hurt students to be successful and quickly move up. You know, if you're working with students in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, you know, you may want to use the algorithms. For anybody in 2 and 3, it won't hurt them to start with grade 1. There's a similar algorithm where you look at what their current rate was on their oral reading fluency assessment, and based on that, you set a rate goal. So you can set a lower rate goal for a student who's really slow for their grade level, and they don't have to try to achieve their grade level immediately. They will build their way up to that. Then there's slides you can practice that with. Question about passages. Any passages will do. Somebody I think asked, can you just use regular text? That would be fine. I have done this practice with just a book that I have a student reading. We say, turn to a page, I chunk it, and say, you're going to read section 1 and do the practice. We personally use the 6-minute solution from Sopris West passages, because they give you copyright to copy the passages if you buy their book. You have unlimited copying possibility, and so we can easily reformat them for ourselves, and they have all the levels you need. I think, guys, I need to let you go. If you have the handouts, they're just a couple of notes at the end, but we've covered the bulk of everything. My email is on the first page of the handouts. It's in the chat, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. I know this is a lot to wrap your head around in just one what I would call a 1 hour session, even though it's a little bit longer than 1 hour. Karen, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael, for a wonderful presentation. And as you mentioned, it's a lot to cover in 1 hour. And just thank you so much for providing your email so that folks can follow up with you with any questions or
Happy to do it.
yeah, so we really appreciate that.